Hey everyone, TruthSurge here. This is going to be a fairly quick Jesus myth video before I do the Judas and Last Supper videos. I was just thinking recently of something that uh, it's something that I don't think has struck many people, uh, during their thinking and studying of this idea of the Jesus myth theory. And it's very similar to what I did in my part 2A and 2B videos, where I basically said if the Jesus myth theory is true, then shouldn't we see something similar to this? And if you don't remember that idea in those first couple of videos, was that if Jesus really hadn't been on earth and he was going to come to earth for the first time at the end of time, then the epistles, which are generally earlier than the Gospels, but definitely outside the Gospel tradition, then the epistles should mention nothing about a returning Jesus. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we saw. Over 40 verses, and not one of them said Jesus would be returning, but he'd be coming, he'd be appearing, he'd be revealed. So along those same lines, I just thought I would throw this other piece of evidence out there, and it seems like there's an endless supply of this stuff. And that's when you know you've got a good theory, I think, when you just keep coming up with things that fit and very few things that don't fit. But check this out. If the Jesus myth theory is true, then we should see a split between the epistles and the Gospels and Acts. And this is what we do see, but here's another aspect of that split. We should see a split regarding the idea of disciples. Because if Jesus was never on earth, there should never be any disciples. He never taught anybody personally. And that's what Paul says. He says he got his information about the gospel from God. God revealed it to him through the pages of the Old Testament. And this is the idea I'm looking at. In the early Christian belief, no one was called a disciple because there was no physical Jesus on earth to teach anybody. This is why you see Paul refer to himself and the others who were Christians before him who were leading the pack. He calls everyone apostles, messengers, but not disciples. But then in the Gospels and Acts, you see the word disciple and disciples used pretty much exclusively. So what I want to do is I want to just run down all the verses where we see the word disciple or disciples from the Gospels and Acts. I'm not going to read the verses. That would be too long. I'm just going to show you the references. Scroll them up. And then I'm going to tally them up. And then I'm going to look at all of the other epistles, and we're going to tally those up and see how many times the word disciple is used. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can see that the number of times the word disciple or disciples appears in the Gospels and Acts is a grand total of 272. Now, I'm going to show you how I got that figure. Go to blueletterbible.com, type in disciple without the S, and do a search. And you can come up with 29 times the word appears. But we have to search for disciple with an S now to make sure that we get all of them. So type in disciples with an S, because this search doesn't seem to search for partial words. Search, and I get 244, but we need to subtract 1 because there's 1 in Isaiah. So 243 plus the 29 gives me that total. You can go verify this by doing just what I did. Now, let's go ahead and run the totals for the epistles and see how many times the word disciple or disciples show up in the epistles. No, there's no malfunction in this video. There are simply no instances of the word disciple in the epistles. Let's go ahead and show you that this is true. We'll go down here. I've already searched for disciples. Now I'm going to scroll and come down and show you. Notice it goes from Matthew to Mark to Luke to John, quite a few in John, Acts, and we're done. There's nothing beyond Acts. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. The word disciple only appears in the gospel accounts and the book of Acts. A stunning revelation, because this is exactly what we would expect to find if the Jesus myth theory was true. And if we look at the word apostle in the New Testament, it occurs in the epistles, but it also occurs in Luke's 2 works, the Gospel of Luke and Acts. There is one occurrence in Matthew that I feel is an interpolation, and one occurrence in Mark that I also feel must be an interpolation. And this concept here, this split, fits perfectly. Think about it. Luke's Gospel and Acts are the latest works in the Galilean tradition. You have Mark, roughly 72, 73, 74 CE. You've got Matthew, maybe 10 years later. Then you've got John, near the end of the 1st century. Then you have Luke, sometime in the early 2nd century, followed closely by Acts after that. By the time the epistles had time to float around, Luke was able to draw from that tradition, and he had access to the writings. The other evangelists, the other gospel writers did not. Mark, Matthew, and John did not. This is why we don't see one case of apostles except for the 2 I mentioned that I feel are interpolations. So they read like interpolations, and you can do a search on blueletterbible.com and find those 2 cases and see for yourself. They sound as if they were inserted later. So we've got no case where anybody in the epistles mentions a disciple. John, Paul, Peter, James, they're all apostles in the epistles. And there's a good reason. As I said earlier, there was no earthly Jesus to disciple anyone. So, this is a strong piece of evidence that argues for the Jesus myth theory. And so I just wanted to throw this out there. I've never heard anyone mention this as far as I can remember. So this is something that we just can put on the table and go, it fits perfectly. Another puzzle piece snugly fitting into place. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw this one out at you. Anyway, I'm going to do the origins of Judas Iscariot and the Last Supper, but that's going to take a lot of research. So I have no idea when I'm going to do that one. It could be weeks and weeks from now. I've got to do a few other things. Anyway, take it easy. Hope you've enjoyed digging through this theory with me, and I've got a lot more to say about it. I just need some time. So take it easy and happy holidays to everyone, and we'll see you next time.